Hello everybody, let me get this screencast started. So today we're going over mechanisms of evolution. Some of you may be already starting halfway in, so feel free to fast forward. Uh, so we are going to talk about factors needed for natural selection. So there's lots of factors that lead to evolution. These are 4 factors specifically for natural selection. So the first factor is the potential for species to increase in number. So you see in this picture, we've got all sorts of dandelions. Those are the seeds and the flowers, and so those are there to help make more of that species. And so it's an advantage to have a large population for a couple of reasons. A lot of people talk about just survival. So if we've got this protection, we've got this herd of bison or buffalo, and they are trying to escape a predator. Well, one of them probably is going to get picked off by a lion or something like that. But as a whole, they survive and are able to pass forward. So numbers are good for that. But really, when we're talking about evolution, big numbers are going to be good for having lots of variation. And we talked about how meiosis and sex and mutation all lead to variation. Variation is important because it allows for different individuals to survive different environmental changes. So that's where we get right into factor 2, the inheritance of variation. And we need that variation because not everything's the same. If everything was the same all the time, variation wouldn't be helpful. But since things change, you need the organisms to change. So the question right here is, why is it an advantage to have variation of a population? You can also think of it the flip. Why is it a disadvantage to not have variation? I've talked about before in class the Cavendish banana, that right now that banana, since it's a clone, like you can't take a banana and plant a new one, like doesn't have any seeds in it. So they've cloned all those bananas, and that's great because you get a consistent banana and it tastes great, all that good sort of stuff. But there's that fungus going around that's affecting these bananas. So if it's hurting one, it's hurting them all. So the whole banana community is going crazy right now because they need to figure out how do we stop this fungus from spreading, because we don't want our whole crops to go extinct. Variation can give disadvantage to some members of the population and advantages to the other. And so right here we have the same species of rabbit, but there's variation in their fur color. Right now, in the winter, this white one has a little bit of advantage over this brown one, but in the summer, the brown one's going to have a little bit of advantage over the white one. So that variation is good, but if the amount of time spent in winter versus summer changes, maybe one's going to have a long-term advantage over the other. We need limited resources, or really it's because there's limited resources, all this other stuff makes a difference. If there was unlimited resources, it wouldn't matter. You could do whatever you want. But since there's competition, then you have to fight against others for the things that you need to survive. And some members, because we have variation, are going to be better at getting those resources than others. Factor 4, the proliferation of those species that are able to survive and reproduce. So you can see two members of the same species of this peppered moth population. And one of them right now is more likely to be seen by a predator and get eaten, while this one, its coloring is better suited. So just like you and I have different color hair and things like that, same sort of thing. Just because they're a different color, they're just a different color, not a different species. So they have an adaptation. Adaptation meaning the traits change when conditions change. Now, what's really important to understand, this isn't Lamarckian evolution, the traits don't change with individual. Like, you can't just decide, man, I'd like to have green eyes, and close your eyes and concentrate and think, okay, now I've got green eyes. Right? You can't do that. Same thing with these moths. So the population, the frequency of how many peppered versus black moths, that's what changes. When we're talking about evolution, we're always talking about population change. So I will link this video into our Google Classroom assignment. I want you to watch this video and pay attention to what's the environmental change, what's the increase in proportion, that's the advantage, what's the decrease. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here, give you a second to get ready, and then I'm going to give you kind of the answers. So our environmental change, we had two. The first one was in the Industrial Revolution. They started burning a lot of coal, a lot of timber, that sort of thing. Really dirty smoke falls onto the tree, and the trees go from being light colored to dark colored. And now the peppered moth, which there was lots of before, there's that peppered color isn't an advantage, and the one that black color is an advantage now. So the population shifts. So let's say there was a lot of white moths before. Now it's kind of shifted, but it's important to know that they don't go completely away because we have those alleles hidden. The big A is black, the big A little a is also black. So that little a, that's the recessive, right? And so this still stays in the population because that heterozygous form has it right there. We get a decrease in the proportion of the individual with the disadvantaged trait. So again, that disadvantaged trait is that white one. But then we had another environmental change. In the 1970s, the Clean Air Act happened, and it started to make that soot go away. Still, we're burning lots of fossil fuels and putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and that's still bad, but they're able to clean up the process so it's not as polluted. And that soot came out of the air, and we have now the white moths are the advantage again because the bark on the trees is lighter. So here we've got two words. It's been a while since you've probably talked about phenotype and genotype. So how does selection against the phenotype change the frequency of the genotypes? So our genotype, think genes, think DNA, these big A, little a's. All right, what are our genes coding for? That's our genotype. The phenotype is what the genes actually produce. So even though we have a gene for the white allele and a gene for the black allele, in this one right here, we've got a black moth. Okay, so selecting against the phenotype, what we saw is the frequency of that little a allele went down, but it's not gone completely because we still have it hidden in this heterozygous form. And often we'll still get a couple of those white ones. So they don't go away completely either, which allows for variation and which allowed for when the color of the bark switched back, the population switched as well. Don't worry about all these numbers. All right, so if a trait lowers an individual's chance to survive or mate, it will not get passed on to the next generation and will become less common. But again, it says less common, not completely disappeared. So natural selection, we've got this nice little leaf bug here. It's adapted to be camouflaged, to hide in with these leaves so it doesn't get eaten by other predators. And yes, this is a predator, so it also helps it sneak around so it can eat other bugs. Individuals that are best adapted to their environment survive and reproduce more frequently. So you probably heard of survival of the fittest, thinking natural selection, but that's just one part of it. The really important part is the reproduction part. All right, I love this picture. I wouldn't write this quote down, but it really points to this idea of how natural selection is a result of three different types of adaptations. We've got anatomical, behavioral, and physiological. Okay, so three main ways of species adapt. So anatomical, like in this picture, I don't know if you know, but you have 7 cervical vertebrae in your neck. Well, take a guess as to how many the giraffe has. If you guess more, you're incorrect. It has the same amount. Remember, we talked about how language builds off in existing structures in your brain. Well, so does the anatomical structures in our neck. Like those structures, those 7 vertebrae, which is the same that it has right there, those were already there. It just grew those. So again, you can't just necessarily make more or less of something just because it's advantageous. You have to work with what you have. So anatomical, we're talking about the physical structures in the body. Behavioral adaptations show how changes change or acts or behaves. We talked a lot about primate behavior. We talked about grooming behavior. So think about how grooming helps. You talked about how it builds social relationships. It helps them advance in rank, but just the physical act of grooming, that's helped getting rid of parasites that might cause damage to the individual. That helps them survive. It definitely helped them reproduce, right? Because it's building those relationships. I'll link this video for you as well. Real interesting video of these, I believe they're humpback whales or gray whales that work together and build these like bubble curtains that scare the little fish together so they can chow down on them. Then we have physiological adaptation. This is a little harder to visualize because it's all about physiology, which is processes, how things work. So there are definitely some anatomical adaptations between both of these animals. The gazelle is made to go real fast. The cheetah is made to go real fast. So what's the deal here? Why bring this up? Well, the gazelle, its metabolism allows it to go really fast for a long time, where the cheetah can go super duper fast for a short time, maybe 15 seconds. So if this gazelle's metabolism can manage to get it and evade for more than 15 seconds, it's going to be able to keep that speed up and go away. Where the metabolism, how fast again this processes energy in the cheetah, it's got to work extra hard to be able to get that gazelle in 15 seconds or else it's lost a meal. Right? So physiology. I'm going to go back to this right here, and let's talk about, all right, anatomical, physiological, behavioral. So we've got these penguins. It's really cold. They're not wearing clothes. Well, how are they keeping warm? There's a few anatomical adaptations. Just their stature, the low surface area to volume, that helps conserve energy. We've got their, not fur, but feathers that keep the heat in. We've got layers of blubber that keep the heat in. Those are all anatomical structures that are helping to keep them warm. But we also have behavior, all right? They're moving around together, staying close together. That's something they're doing, and that relates closely to their physiology. The fact that they're warm-blooded, since they're moving around, they're building heat. Since they're moving around together, each other's heat is keeping them warm. So those three things working together right here in this one picture, even though it seems kind of a boring picture, there's so much happening here when we're talking about adaptations. Back forward. No, we don't want to watch that video. Estivation. You can kind of think of it like hibernation, but gross, so it's fun. I'll link that in there. But basically, these animals are resting, protecting themselves somehow to hold in moisture so that they can come back later. So, you know, a lot of times there's dry seasons and wet seasons, and these things like the wet season, and they'll just kind of hibernate and protect their moisture over the dry season and pop back out. So I'll link this video as well. So sexual dimorphism, we should be good with this. We've talked about this a few times in anthropology. We have big males and small females, or we have this peahen that has all these bright colors to help show off how fit it is. This doesn't actually help it survive, right? This makes it harder to survive. It takes a lot of resources to build these colors, to build these feathers, and it's not going to be able to escape a predator very well. However, the peahen, it's going to do a lot better. So we've got our peacock and our peahen. And what's happening is we have female mate choice. This guy's showing off to say, look how good I am. And the female is going to choose the best one. And so we have a very different looking male than we have female. All right? So that's sexual dimorphism. Two distinct physical differences between the sexes. All right, here's a little quote for you if you want to write that down. And that leads to sexual selection, where we can have intra, which is within the same sex. So we have here the picture of the bucks that are rutting. They're competing with each other to find dominance, and the dominant one will be able to mate. We also have intersexual selection, which is like what we saw with our peacock and peahen, and that's going to be where the male is showing off and the female is doing the mate choice. So I'll link this video as well. It's about how the female chooses the male here in this group. And this is a nice little funny one. Same thing. Birds, often a bunch of sexual dimorphism. I'm sure you realize usually the male birds are the ones that are more brightly colored. They're showing off so that the female chooses them. Also going with that, a lot of times with the female mate choice, we talk about bird songs. We talked about songs with the gibbons, those sorts of things. Right? So why does this evolve? The whole thing is, remember we talked about proximate and ultimate reasons. The ultimate evolutionary reason is that if it's able to survive putting all these extra calories, all these extra resources in, it has genes that help it be fit to survive, and then also the reproduce part. So the female's not thinking about genetics, right? But the female has been programmed because of evolution, because of those genes combining, to choose those mates that are the more extravagant, right? That can do the better dance, that can do the better song, that can produce the more colorful, not foliage, but plumage. Right? So go back, rewatch if you need to, and can you answer what the 4 factors are? What's the difference between inter and intrasexual selection? What is sexual dimorphism? What's the good gene hypothesis? What sexual selection? Those sorts of things. So we have things that are more than just natural selection, or sometimes part of natural selection you can think of, where we can change the alleles, change how frequent, like that light moth or that dark moth pop up. And again, we're just talking about the alleles, not the whole organism. Directional selection. Hey, we're coming up on Thanksgiving. This is very appropriate. We eat turkey. And so over the past 50, 100 years, turkeys that we eat have really changed a lot. And so you can kind of think of like a normal bell curve is we have a lot of medium sized, a few small ones, and a few big ones. And in this, we're looking specifically at the size of the breast meat, all right? And so over the last, like I said, 50, 100 years, that size has really extremely changed. So that allele for the large turkey breast is a lot more common. So we've shifted it. So when I'm taking notes, what I'm doing here is I'm kind of explaining this example. I'm definitely drawing this little graph. It can be just a little sketch. It doesn't have to be very fancy. All right? And you're putting this into your notes because I know on the quiz there'll probably be one that says, hey, look at this graph. What type of selection happening? Is it directional? Is it stabilizing? Is it disruptive? Right? And they're all going to have 3 different graphs. Another one we have is this disruptive. And this is talking about our salmon. This is really good. Go down to Ansel Hoffman. Go to Lake Natoma Bridge, see the salmon running. It's pretty cool. But what you'll see is there's kind of 2 different strategies for them reproducing. One is to be a very big salmon, right? And that salmon, the way it does is it's kind of claiming its little territory. It doesn't let any males in that territory. It'll let the females come. They'll lay their eggs. It will fertilize it. The medium-sized ones, if they try and get into the area of the bigger male, that bigger male is going to fight them off, and they won't be able to reproduce. But the smaller one can kind of be sneaky, and it looks more female-like. So it will get into that area that the male's in, and that big male is going to go, okay, you're just a lady, and it will find those eggs and fertilize them. So we have kind of 2 reproductive strategies. So being big is a big advantage. Being small is a big advantage, but being medium size is a disadvantage, right? And then we have stabilizing selection. This is a good example, especially for this anthro class where you have humans, all right? We have pretty big brains, pretty big heads, and that birthing process is something that is complicated and could be dangerous. And if you get too big of a head, if the baby's too big, then you're at risk of hurting the mother and that mother dying. If you're too small, the baby's at risk of not being ready to survive outside and dying. So we have this really narrow band. Most children, oh, there goes the light. Let's push pause. Most children born are born between the 6-pound and 9-pound mark. And most hospitals aren't going to let you take your child home if it's under that 6 pounds right away. So we have where kind of the middle The stable part is what's going to be the advantage, and the two extremes are the disadvantage. All right, so again, sketch out all three of those graphs. I'd label them, and yeah, there we go. So we've got microevolution versus macroevolution. What we've been talking about with changing the allele frequencies, all right, changing how frequent that moth is, just looking at one species, that's kind of microevolution. Macroevolution is going to be what we're talking about when we're talking about evolution of multiple populations, extinction level events, new species coming into. That's macroevolution. And so what we're going to be looking at human evolution over time, we're going to be seeing a little bit of both, how little changes are going to lead to big changes over time, and how big climactic changes, that's usually what leads to macroevolution, like worldwide climate changes, macroevolution. Right, so again, check these things. What are the three forms of selection that can drive a change in a trait? What's the difference between microevolution and macroevolution? So evolution is a change in allele frequencies. Other than natural selection, what other factors can change an allele frequency? So we could have artificial selection. So it's definitely not natural, it's artificial. So like a lot of domesticated plants, a lot of domesticated animals, this is also something that helped, inspire Darwin. People have been changing and picking what traits they wanted in their food, their animals, and so we can do that really rapidly. So artificial selection, picking the traits that you want, breeding those together to get new things that are better for your group. Right? Artificial selection is going to change allele frequencies super duper fast. Genetic drift, right? That's really important. That's what happens, think small populations somehow. So this is our bottleneck event, and we have a big population with a lot of variation, all right? About even blue and white and a couple yellows. And then there's a bottleneck event, something like a tornado, a hurricane, a famine, a drought, something like that, a disease, all right? And only a small amount survive. And now if you look, we don't have that diverse population. And so our frequencies have changed, okay? We can also have genetic drift where we have founder effect, where we have a small population randomly leave to start a new population, and that is our genetic drift. We've got a different frequency of red and blue alleles. Oops, click the link. So let's go. Here's another little link of video from the Amoeba Sisters. I'll link this for you to watch to help clarify. Gene flow is kind of not the opposite, but instead of small populations, we're dealing with big populations. We have mass migrations. So think of what's going on when we talked about people from Eastern Northern Asia, the Chukchi. They moved to the Americas. They're bringing all those genes with them, right? And there were people that were like them afterwards that came and brought new genes, right? And then think of the Americas again. Think of the 1700s, 1600s. People from Europe, we had their genes come with them, and those Europeans also brought people from Africa, which have very different genes. And again, I want to point out the African people, it wasn't their choice, but they brought their genes with them as well. And so we have this mixture of genes from these large population migrations. Here's a little video about gene flow. We'll link that as well. So check your answers. Besides natural selection, what can cause changing allele frequencies? Make sure you have some examples, right? Make sure you write questions. Make sure you write summaries. I want nice, detailed Cornell notes. All right, I hope you're able to use those resources, put it all together, and have a little bit of understanding of natural selection, evolution, what leads to evolution.